The popular culture is very much that the external world is the primary world and we adjust to it. And that our happiness or sadness depends on how we relate to the external world. And the single unifying demographic of Shivananda, of Yogananda, of Kriyananda, of all these different paths is the reverse of that. That the primary world is the world of consciousness within me, and according to my consciousness, that's how I relate to the external world. And that's the transition that we're in as a planet. And everything about the way our world has changed since 1900, which is when this new age really began, is all about energy. So for us, in our lives as human beings, the way this shifts consciousness is that we used to have the security of form. You know, we had our nationality, we had our culture, we had our religion. You came to a new town and you found the Methodist church. And you went to the Methodist church because I'm a Methodist and this is what I do. And nowadays, if you come to it, or looking for a church at all, which most people are not these days, you look for the one that inspires you. Because once we're working with energy, we're not bound by form anymore. But what happens to us when we start on a path that, like this one, meaning the path of inner awakening, Yogananda used the word self-realization. That word has become associated in an institutional way, but that's not how he intended it. I realize my real self, and that's a capital S self. I've lived in my small s self for a long time, but my divine self is where all of us rise above what limits us and comes to what joins us. But because the form of this is not as clear as just being a Methodist or being a Catholic, there is a comfort in form, because then you can look around and make sure that you're doing it right. And you can also feel like, I know I'm going to go to heaven because I'm following all the rules. But spiritual life must be absolutely authentic. You cannot wear it from the outside. It has to grow from inside of you, and that's the only way it'll grow. Each one of us is an apple seed, so to speak. I mean, apple seeds are so small. You know, peach pits are bigger. And the most remarkable thing is that each one of those has the full potential. But not one of those can go from being a seed to a tree. No matter how desperately and impatiently that seed wants to be a tree, it will not get there. It has to go through every single stage. And no matter how tiresome it is to be a sapling and how much you long to be a tree, like nobody cares. You still have to do it. You just still have to do it. And so on our spiritual path, to be really authentic on the path of self-realization, it has to be my own next step. And the tremendous challenge of the spiritual path is to recognize how high the mountain is and what a climb this is really going to be, and not think somehow that there's a shortcut, as simple as that. Much of the time I find when people are faced with a dilemma of whatever it is that's really troubling their lives, they're just really looking for an alternative. You know, I often call it the search for the mythical third option. It's like you have to go here or you have to go here. And neither of those is attractive, so I'm just going to turn here and I'm going to throw myself against this wall. And then I'm going to lie on the ground and weep because I can't seem to get through. So I'll get up again and try to throw myself through the wall. And meanwhile, the doors are behind you, but we don't want. Or more deeply, I'm afraid. I was in a difficult position in my life once where I had a decision to make, and it was an either-or decision. It was either this or this, and there was no in-between. And this was when I was very new on the spiritual path. I was very, I don't know how to put it, emotional, extremely emotional, and way drama queen, way drama queen. So I was desperately praying, because I really wanted to do what God wanted. So I'm desperately praying for God's will. And I prayed and I prayed, and then I anguished, and then I prayed, and then I anguished because God was not answering me. And finally, somehow in this context, I found my way to Swami Kriyananda, because at that time in our communities, we were very small and we had very easy access to him. He lived down the hill from where I lived, and I went down to his house, and he was sitting in this, chair, comfortable living room chair with a hassock, a cloth hassock between. So he's in the chair, I'm sitting on the floor on the other side of the hassock, and I'm pouring out. I mean, in retrospect, I would be embarrassed, but it's not worth it. I'm pouring out my sincere desire to do God's will and my inability to know God's will, finally utterly overcome by my helplessness. I put my head down and began to cry, and then I lifted my head and I said, it's so hard to know what God wants. And then overcome, I collapsed again to cry. Then through my sobbing, I hear Swami Kriyananda saying, no, it's not hard. And it was like, no, it's not hard, but aren't you listening to me? Aren't you watching me? Don't you feel? And then he just sort of stopped talking. And he's not a Zen koan kind of person. He was very easy. We had lots of perfectly natural conversation, but he didn't have anything else to say. So after a time, I sensed that the interview was over, and I got up and I walked up the hill to my house, which is about a 2-minute walk to my trailer. House is really not the right word. This little trailer I lived in. And all the way up, I'm getting madder and madder. Like I'm having all this difficulty, and he doesn't have any sympathy for me and poor me and what, And I get to my trailer and I sit down in my little meditation place, and I realize, and you see, this is where we have to be very conscious. I had shifted what Swamiji had said. I had shifted from, it's not hard to know what God wants. I'd made it him saying, it's not hard for me, Kriyananda, to know. As if I was an inferior, he was a superior. But that's not what he said. He said, it's not hard to know what God wants. And so I'm meditating, and all of a sudden, first of all, I notice, whoa, look what I just did. Because the great danger on the spiritual path is that we bring the path down to fit the size that we already are, right? Because the mountain is too high, and so I would rather be closer to the top of the mountain. So if I just adjust things a little bit, then I can claim it here, and I'll just be comfortable right where I am. So my first horror was to see that I'd shifted it. But then I had to just be honest. All right, Swamiji. And so I had this inner conversation. He's at a distance at this point, but the relationship was always intuitive. So I said, okay, why am I having so much trouble then? And as soon as I asked the right question, see, the only question I'd been asking is, what do you want? What do you want? This or this? What, like this. Finally, I asked the question, why am I having so much trouble? And I had an immediate intuitive answer, because you don't want to know. And I said, well, of course I want to know. Why would I want to know? Because you are afraid of what is trying to happen. That was my first introduction to the fact that fear is everything. My first introduction, actually, was from Swami Vivekananda when he quoted what turned out to be from St. John of the Bible, which I didn't know at the time. I mentioned it last night. Perfect love casts out all fear. That was one of the very first things I learned on the spiritual path, and to this day, it's one of my major mantras that I have to keep asking. So there I'm sitting, because you are afraid of the answer. So the prayer suddenly became, what am I afraid of? And ever since then, which is more than 50 years in my life, whenever I have trouble knowing what is right, I ask myself, what am I afraid of? It was perfectly obvious, because it was perfectly obvious what was trying to happen, and I did not want that to be the answer. So as long as I pretended, and I was sincere, as long as I acted like I wanted to know, but was trapped in this confusion of God's silence, then I didn't have to really pay attention to what was happening. I was looking for the mythical third alternative, which just simply didn't exist. And there was nothing Swami Kriyananda could do. As long as I was determined to try to throw myself through the stone wall and have it turn into a door, no power on earth could make that happen. On earth, in heaven, on any planet could make that happen. Because here's another principle that is worth remembering. Reality always wins. It's as simple as that. We can have all the thoughts we want, and we can tell God how good we are and how well we've been behaving. We can have the contract all set. I've been doing all the right things, and this is supposed to be the result. But reality always wins. And reality is actually pretty simple. Reality is we have karma, and karma isn't something you don't know yet about the nature of reality, about what brings suffering and what brings happiness. Every single decision that we ever make is because we think it will make us suffer less and be happy more. And every decision everybody makes, no matter how crazy, this is how I deal with the madness of the planet at this point, which, if you're not frightened, is very entertaining. And I go between being entertained and being frightened. That these people many people who are doing horrible things, just evil, uncompassionate, crazy things. And they're doing it because somehow they think it's going to increase their happiness and decrease their suffering. From the perspective of others, it looks nuts. But from their perspective, this is an unlearned lesson. This is karma they have to follow. We incarnate in a place, and every minute of every day, the vibrations in our chakras are attracting and repelling exactly what we need for us to learn something we don't know about what causes suffering and what brings happiness. And where we get trapped is that we're afraid. We're afraid that if this is true, then all these other things will happen. Or if this is true, what does it mean about me? Or about them? Or about this situation? Whatever it might be. And then we sort of set ourselves against that which is. And as one of my dear friends said to me once, and how's that working out for you? Not well. Not very well, I said. Then, she asked the obvious next question. Then why are you doing it? Well, because I'm afraid. And so I'm desperately clinging to this idea. In Autobiography of a Yogi, for those of you who've read it, one of the very big characters in it is Swami Sri Yukteswar, who is the guru of Yogananda. And Sri Yukteswar is very austere. He's described as very austere. And so one thinks of that austerity as, just a little frightening. And I have finally come to understand that Sri Yukteswar is not at all austere. He's just very calmly understands that reality always wins. And so there's just no point in having a hissy fit about it, honestly, because sooner or later we're just going to have to face it. And a great deal of our energy is spent looking for a loophole. Yeah, just looking for a loophole. Can't there be some other? Is there anybody else I can talk to? Right. So the very first thing that we really have to learn on the spiritual path is if it comes to me, it's my karma. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we accept it passively. And this is where the example of the masters is so essential. We need examples in front of us as what you do about it at that point. And Swami Kriyananda and Yogananda and Lord Krishna and Shivananda, these people were marvelously proactive. They didn't take reality and just sit there. They constantly molded it. Anandamoyi Ma, who was a great saint, a woman saint in India, she passed in 1982. There's a chapter about her in Autobiography of a Yogi, and many of you know her because she's such a vivid figure. And one of her expressions to people was, what comes of itself, let it come. And then someone said to her, but mother, even things that are evil and not right, if somebody really wants to, send you something that isn't right, what happens then? And then and mother said, let them try. Just like that. Because part of reality is I can meet it with the power that comes from inside. just because the external world is moving in a certain direction, passivity is not the same as a realistic understanding of the conditions that we're facing. And this is where willpower comes from. But what is it that inhibits our willpower above all things? Fear and timidity. Isn't that right? And we can't take on these issues just full bore. A woman friend came to me, and she was talking about her extreme anger at her mother and the way she'd been raised. And she had a very unfortunate upbringing with a very difficult woman. So her reaction of anger was perfectly justified given the circumstances. But I said to her, as I have often observed, when you have karma that starts, bang in the womb like her, sometimes it's something that you're really, really, really meant to face, because you're not given even a moment of respite. It's just, this is my lesson. So her anger was a huge part of her reality. And I said to her, if something is manifesting, if a reaction to an obstacle is that big, then it's probably present in other parts of your life. No, she said, the only anger I have is toward my mother. And I knew differently. I really, what happens when the stupid driver cuts you off on the highway? What happens when your housemates don't do the dishes? What happens when somebody eats the last banana and it was your banana? Like that. Because anything that manifests big always manifests small. And so sometimes you have to just chew around the edges of it. But what we're doing is we're reversing a flow of energy. Because what's the karma that's in our chakras is just an energy pattern. This is the part you have to realize. Our responses, there's nothing inside of us. The person who did this, the thing that happened when you were in the court of the Queen in England, the time that you were sacrificed by the natives who thought that you were evil, whatever it might be, the time that you were the king, the time that you were the beggar. I mean, tell the stories. I love to make up stories. So many situations in my life make so much more sense if I can tell a plot line from some previous lifetime. I've been doing it so long, I can't remember now which ones I think are actually true, because they work. The way these people treat me is as if. Right, the way I feel about you is as if. And then all of a sudden, because see, this is also what's confusing, the feeling that you have may be completely real, because the energy was created in some incarnation, it was stored in your chakras, and it was never resolved. So you meet either that vibration or that person, and you start where you left off. So you're already off to the races. Either you are my one true only, and we're going to be together forever, and the other one says, are you kidding? I have this book called Ask Asha, which was questions I got off of the internet years ago. And this man wrote to me, questions people wrote to me. And he wrote this long letter, and this was the end of it. My wife loves to say that we're going to be married again in our next life. As far as I'm concerned, one life was one too many. Do I have to marry her again? Which was, it was a very real question. So she meets him, or maybe they've reversed gender by that time. She is 100% for it, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. And nothing is created by what's happening now, but all of the feelings are real. Because they're really in there, they really happen. But they're not related to the circumstances that are going on now. You see how confusing it becomes? But anything that's rolling through is because it's unfinished business on some level, and we have to be able to look at it honestly and work again. And I had a thread going, and now I've lost it. I'll drink water again and see if I can remember it. Oh, but but we get afraid. This is too hard. I don't want to do it. This is what I'm already committed to. Oh, but this would not have come to me if it wasn't something that I needed. But one of the characteristics of spiritual life is that it takes more energy than just going with what's already in place. I mean, the karma is also momentum. It's like if you're going 100 miles an hour and you realize you're on the wrong road, you can get to the right road, but you have to do all these things in order to slow where you're headed and turn your car around. Then, of course, you run into the detour, and then you run into the road work. Then you find out that that particular on-ramp is closed, and then, it goes on like that. But if you're determined, you can keep going. But if you think that as soon as I think about it, it's going to change, that's not true, because all this momentum is in place. And what we are, to a very large extent, afraid of is the need to put out more energy. Right. So one of the ways in which we begin to overcome fear and overcome karma, that's what I was talking about, is that we just do, and I know this sounds like nothing, a little better than your worst. When you start thinking about it as an energy universe, if you think of it as a balance scale, you've made certain decisions that leans you this way. So when a new situation comes, the marble rolls down where the floor is slanted. And so what you need to do is you need to get it to even and then tip it in favor of where you're now going, which means you try to not load up the wrong side and you add what you can to this side. So your worst is what is already the momentum you already have. And if you just do a little better than your worst, at least you're not adding to it. And even if it's only a hair, you're adding to this one. But this is a long project, and much longer than most people realize. And the other thing that we're afraid of is how long it's going to take. I really got serious on the path when I was 18. I moved to the ashram when I was 24. And when I was 36, which might sound like a long time to you, it doesn't seem long to me, I felt like my subconscious had been working against me for 12 years. I had done a little better than my worst, which, believe me, was not always really impressive. I'd done a little better than my worst for 12 years, and it suddenly went like that. It didn't go like that, but I suddenly became aware that my natural inclination was better than it had been up until that point. And see, one of the things that we also fear, seriously, is that it's just not a dramatic, one big giant weekend, huge catharsis, now I'm free. Yeah. It's just a very, very long, often boring, often arduous, just process of inching forward. Because that's what it is. And these are the fears that we have to face. And we can't tell. We really can't tell whether we're growing or not, because it's too subtle. If you're really growing, it's too subtle. You just surprise yourself. I was in a situation where this woman had done some really bad things, really awful things. And then circumstances being what they are in life, she emerged triumphant, even though she was totally wrong. And I was so proud of myself, and I still am, that my first impulse when she won was, oh, that poor woman. I just felt so compassionate for her because, oh my God, not only did she just betray and lie and do all these awful things, but she's going to be rewarded for it. I thought, oh my God, it's going to take her so long to work her way out of this karma. And often when I look at people I don't know just all over the planet, I think, oh dear, what's going to happen to them next? Because karma eventually, reality always wins. They may have the karma right now to be on the top, but if they're out of tune with divinity, they're having these experiences so they can learn, how is that working out for you? And so why would we be afraid when circumstances in our lives are giving us a chance to become better? We're afraid because too much energy and, oh dear, I don't want it. And then how's that working out for you? Reality always wins. These are very simple ideas. That's where I started. These are very simple ideas. That's what I was saying last night. because this world is complicated, but divinity isn't. One last thought, and then I'm going to take a short break before we go to the next part. Everything in creation emanates from a point of stillness. Everything that seems dual resolves into the one. All of the Sanskrit chants that we're doing, it's all about the one infinite. Everything resolves to the one, which is to say, the farther you are from the one, the more space there is for all of this duality to keep swinging like this. The closer you come to the one, first of all, the arc is much smaller, and also eventually it resolves into one, which is to say it gets simpler and simpler and simpler. And instead of actually losing all of this, we start getting to the origin point of all of this. When Swamiji very sweetly, people tend to think that being original means being different than other people, but being original actually means to emanate from your point of origin. That's where the word original comes from, the point of origin. And the closer we get to that simple point of origin, the more everything else is obvious.